One of the most interesting discoveries of the late 1960s was made by A.W. Phillips, a New Zealand economist working in Great Britain. The discovery, while valid in the short run, does not necessarily hold up in the long run. Let's look at Phillips' discovery and see how it ultimately was proven to only exist under certain conditions. The Phillips Curve is the discovery of A.W. Phillips, an economist from New Zealand. He argued that there was a trade-off between inflation and unemployment. Specifically, he argued that an economy could have higher inflation and lower unemployment, or an economy could have lower inflation and higher unemployment. This graph represents Phillips' conclusions about the relationship between unemployment and the price level. Before starting on the economics of the graph, let's take a minute to review its structure. The horizontal axis represents the amount of unemployment. As one moves from right to left, the amount of unemployment increases. The vertical axis, or the up and down axis, represents the price level, or more commonly, the rate of inflation. The rate of inflation, or the price level, will increase as we move up that axis. The Phillips curve itself is J-shaped. What Phillips thought he observed that was when the unemployment was relatively high, for example U1, the price level would be relatively low, for example P1. If unemployment level were to drop to a relatively low level, for example U2, the price level would be relatively high. Thus, an economy could choose between a relatively low level of prices and a relatively high unemployment rate, or a relatively high price level and a low employment rate, according to Phillips. Phillips' view held until the 1970s, when his discovery broke down when the United States and Western Europe experienced increasing prices and increased unemployment, or cost-push inflation, or sometimes also known as stagflation. Let's look at the graph using numbers to review the concept. Suppose an economy has at a 10% unemployment level and has 2% inflation, or increases in the price level over time. Now suppose the government intervenes in the economy to reduce the unemployment rate down to 5%. This means that prices would have to increase, in our example up to 10%. What Phillips argued is that an economy can choose either a lower price level, 2% in our case, with a higher unemployment of 10%, or a higher price level of 10% with a lower unemployment rate of 5%. The key point here is to notice that he argued there was a trade-off between the price level and unemployment. Now, let's look why Phillips curve only holds up in the short run. To do this, we're going to need two graphs. On the left side, there's a graph where the horizontal axis represents real GDP. Remember that GDP increases as one moves from right to left. The vertical axis represents the price level, which increases as one moves up from the bottom upward. There is also an aggregate demand curve and an aggregate supply curve. And the point where the aggregate demand curve and the aggregate supply curve cross each other gives an equilibrium GDP, which represents the full employment GDP, or GDP where there is no unemployment due to the business cycle, or no cyclical unemployment. The point where the aggregate demand curve and the aggregate supply curve crosses also gives the equilibrium price level for the economy. On the right side, the graph on the right is the Phillips curve. As you remember, the Phillips curve has unemployment on the horizontal axis, which increases as one moves from left to right, and price level on the vertical axis, which increases as one moves from the bottom of the axis to the top. Notice that the price level used on the graph of the aggregate supply curve and the aggregate demand curve is the same price level on the Phillips curve. Since the price level on the aggregate supply curve and the aggregate demand curve associated with full employment GDP is the same price level on the Phillips graph, then it will be associated with the natural rate of unemployment, which you may remember is the amount of unemployment that occurs when there is no cyclical unemployment. Now let's look at the mechanism by which the Phillips curve works in the short run. As you may remember, the economy is at its full employment level and its natural rate of unemployment. The government decides that the natural rate of unemployment is too high and it needs to find jobs for those individuals who do not have jobs. The government will do this by increasing government spending. In order to decrease unemployment, the government spends additional money or reduces taxes on the population. As you may remember, when the government spends additional money or reduces taxes, the income of the workers in the economy will increase. When the incomes of the workers increase, their demand for goods and services will increase as well, causing the aggregate demand curve ADO to shift to the right to AD1. The aggregate demand curve AD1 now crosses the aggregate supply curve at a higher point on the aggregate supply curve. The new equilibrium price is now P1. If a line is drawn from the price level P1 on the aggregate supply and demand graph to the graph of the Phillips curve, then the new price level on the Phillips curve is also P1. Since the new price level on the Phillips graph is P1, a line drawn from the price level axis to the Phillips curve shows that the price level touches the Phillips curve. Next, to see the level of unemployment associated with the new price level P1, drop a line down from the Phillips curve to the horizontal axis, which represents the new unemployment rate U1. Notice that U1 is lower than the natural rate of unemployment UN, and the Phillips observations seem to hold that to help eliminate unemployment at the expense of higher prices. In order to decrease unemployment, the government needs to spend some additional money or reduce taxes on the population. As you may remember, when the government spends additional money or reduces taxes, the incomes of the workers in the economy will increase. When incomes of the workers increase, their demands for goods and services will increase also, causing the aggregate demand curve to shift to the right. The aggregate demand curve now crosses the aggregate supply curve at a higher point on the aggregate supply curve. The new equilibrium price is now P1. If a line is drawn from the price level P1 on the aggregate supply and aggregate demand graph to the graph of the Phillips curve, then a new price level on the Phillips graph is also P1. Since the new price level on the Phillips graph is now P1, a line drawn from the price axis to the Phillips curve shows where the price level touches the Phillips curve. Next, to see the level of unemployment associated with the new price level P1, drop a line down from the Phillips curve to the horizontal axis, which represents the unemployment U1. Notice that U1 is lower than the natural rate of unemployment, UN, and the Phillips observations seem to help eliminate unemployment at the expense of higher prices. Initially, when the price level increases, most individuals might not immediately notice the price increases. However, individuals soon discover that their paychecks are not providing them with the money they need to cover their expenses. Naturally, they will begin to demand a wage increase, or they will leave their employers for employers who will pay more. However, as a consequence of a higher price level, is that all prices are increasing, including the price of labor and other inputs used to produce goods and services. As you may remember, when the price level of inputs increases, the supply level will shift to the left. Aggregate supply curves are no different. So when the price level increases as a result of an increased demand, the aggregate supply curve ASO will shift to the left to aggregate supply curve AS1. Notice that the aggregate supply curve AS1 now crosses the aggregate demand curve 81 at a new higher price level P2. Also notice that GDP has returned to its full employment level. If a line is drawn from the price axis on the aggregate supply and demand graphs to the Phillips curve graph, it will cross the price level on the Phillips graph at P2. Since the full employment GDP associated with the natural rate of unemployment, a line is drawn from P2 to the line representing the natural rate of unemployment. A line would be drawn from P2 to the line representing the natural rate of unemployment. Notice that the point where the price level P2 is associated with the natural rate of unemployment is not the first Phillips curve. However, according to theory, there is a Phillips curve on which that particular price level and the natural rate of unemployment must exist. So there must be a new Phillips curve that comes into being with a higher price level and the same level of unemployment. As a result from the analysis of the previous screen, there is a whole family of Phillips curves at different price levels. There are two consequences in the long run for the economy. Increased government spending and tax reduction leads to increases in the price level with no long run level changes in the level of unemployment. A decrease in government spending and higher taxes leads to decreases in the price level with no long run changes in the level of unemployment. In this part of the video, we'll look at the political process and the Phillips curve. One of the temptations of politicians is to manipulate the economy in order to be re-elected for office. For example, a politician may manipulate the money supply of government spending to increase employment and take credit for creating a relative period of prosperity. How can a politician manipulate the economy to lower unemployment? The economic situation several months before the election looks like in the graphs above. A politician wants to make sure that people vote for her, so she persuades the Federal Reserve to increase the money supply by 20%. After the Federal Reserve increases the money supply, aggregate demand shifts to the right, causing an increase both in GDP and the price level, and a decrease in unemployment. The price level rises and unemployment decreases. The result of the increased price level is to cause wages to increase, which in turn causes the aggregate supply curve to shift to the left. After the election, after everyone else has forgotten about the Federal Reserve's action, the price level increases to a higher value and the unemployment level returns to its natural rate. Let's look at the relationship between wages and inflation. Before we do so, let's talk a little bit about the different types of expectations. First, expected inflation is inflation that economic agents think will occur in the future. Unexpected inflation is inflation that economics agents don't think will happen. And the reservation wage is the lowest wage an individual will accept from an employer. Suppose Rita is looking for a job as a programmer and her reservation wage is $40,000 per year. 5 companies offer her jobs at $30,000, $35,000, $37,000, $40,000, and $43,000 a year. Will she accept any of these offers? Well, let's take a minute and analyze the situation. Remember that Rita's reservation wage is $44,000 a year. The first firm offers Rita a job at $30,000 a year and her reservation wage is $44,000 a year. So will she take this job? No. A firm offers Rita a job for $35,000 a year and Rita's reservation wage is $44,000 per year. Will she take this job? No. A firm offers Rita a job for $37,000 per year, and Rita's reservation wage is $44,000 per year. So will she take this job? No. A firm offers Rita a job for $40,000, and Rita's reservation wage is $44,000. So will she take this job? No. A firm offers Rita a job for $43,000 a year, and Rita's reservation wage is $44,000 a year. Will she take this job? No. She will not accept any of these offers because her minimum wage or reservation wage has not been met. She will continue to look for a job. Now suppose that the Federal Reserve increases the money supply by 10%. As you may remember, that the increase in money supply will cause interest rates to decrease, which in turn, according to the neoclassical theory of investment, will cause an increase in investment. The increase in investment will cause aggregate demand to shift to the right, causing the price level to increase as well. As a result of the increases in prices, the firms where Rita interviewed now have increased the wage they offer to potential workers. Will Rita accept any of these jobs? So let us remember that Rita's reservation wage is $44,000 per year. A firm offers Rita a job for $33,000 a year, and her reservation wage is $44,000 a year. No, she won't take that one. A firm offers Rita a job for $38,500 a year, and Rita's reservation wage is $44,000 a year. So will she take this job? No. A firm offers Rita a job for $40,000 a year, and her reservation wage is $44,000 per year. Will she take this job? No. A firm offers Rita a job for $44,000 a year, and her reservation wage is $44,000 per year. Will she take this job? Yes, this might be a potential job for her to take. The final firm offers her a job for $47,300 a year, and Rita's reservation wage is still $44,000 per year. So this might imply that she would also look at this job as a potential. The key problem with what Rita has just done is she has not figured in that she also needs to increase her reservation wage by 10%. Thus, this is why the Phillips curve works in the short run, because workers, thinking that the increased offers of wages means that they're going to be better off in the future. What they haven't anticipated is that all prices are going up in the future, and that their increases in wages will not necessarily make them better off. Let's take a minute to look at two theories about how individuals form their expectations about the future and what policies the Federal Reserve and government spending policies should be. Expectations are formed in two ways. They are either adaptive expectation, in which the economics agent's expectations are made on the basis of past choices and outcomes of those choices from the past. So, for example, people eventually learn that when the Federal Reserve increases the money supply by 10%, all prices go up by 10%. Rational expectations, on the other hand, economic agents' expectations are made based on rational analysis of all current economic information. That is, they understand when a 10% increase in the money supply will lead to increased prices, and when it will lead to real growth in the economy. Monetary authorities need to be credible when they make economic decisions that impact the country. They need to choose a course of action, and they need to follow it no matter what the consequences. First off, fixed or predictable money growth. 2. The Federal Reserve must give clear long-term goals. 3. The Federal Reserve must stick to its goals despite what's happening in the economy. Government authorities need to be credible when they make economic decisions about the economy as well. They need to choose a course of action that needs to be followed. Predictable or fixed spending policies. fixed or predictable taxation policies, and once again, the government should stick to its goals despite what is happening in the economy.